Good morning. We're so very glad to have each and every one of you here with us this morning to worship, those here in person and online. And I want to say happy Father's Day to all of the fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers. Anyone in here a great-grandfather? There are a good number, a few of them, very good. A good handful of great-grandfathers. What an honor. We know you're all very proud, and we're thankful for our fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers. Have you ever thought that things that were made decades ago were made better, with greater quality, that they were actually built to last? Doesn't it seem like a lot of things that are made in recent decades aren't made all that well? They're not really made to last. That's an interesting thing to study as to why. That has to do with consumer desires that was engineered by companies and industrial designers and people inventing products, but we don't want the same thing for very long. We want the new thing. And so in order to keep costs down, because we demand good prices on things, materials have to get cheaper and things have to be made faster so they can churn out more stuff for us to get, and quality tends to suffer. So although there's some advantages of the advancement of technology and progress, there's also a downside, and a lot of times the downside is quality, that most things are no longer made to last, built to last. They are made to be disposed of and get a new one. Think about your TV, your refrigerator, your washing machine, even clothes and toys and vehicles. None of those last like the old things did. And a lot of times we don't even worry fixing them. We just buy a new one. That's the way they were designed now. But when it comes to our faith and our families, we need them to be built to last. When it comes to our faith and our families, we need them to be built to last, don't we? We don't need to just start off strong in our faith, excited, full of energy, only to run out of energy, give up down the road, and throw it away. No, we need a faith that is built to last. We need to finish strong in our faith and in our family. And we want to pass on our faith to leave a legacy of faithfulness to God. Well, how do we do that? Well, of course, throughout the Bible, there's many things we could look at. There's a lot of ways we could come at that question. How do we have a faith, a family that's built to last? But Paul helps us in 1 Corinthians 13 with some really good guidance and a great place to start as to how we can have a faith and a family that is built to last. So look with me at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and I'll read verses 1 through 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest of these is love. Now, in context, Paul is writing to the Christians in Corinth, and he's addressing a few things in this letter. He's addressing a lot of immorality that's going on in the church. And he's also addressing the fact that they had been given miraculous spiritual gifts, like was common in the first century, that was given to them to confirm the message of Jesus as they taught others the gospel. And that's why Jesus did miracles, John tells us, and that's why miracles were done in the first century. And as Paul says here, the time was coming, he's telling them, where these will cease. And they ceased with the end of the first century Christians, with the completion of the New Testament, because now we have God's completed word, everything that we need. But there was a purpose for them in the first century. But what was happening in the midst of the immorality that was happening in the church, there was also people there who were given what they considered to be greater gifts, greater spiritual gifts, and they were looking down upon those who had lesser spiritual gifts. You know, I can speak in tongues and you can only, you have some knowledge, or whatever it might be. There was this us versus them, me against you, I'm better than you, this division happening in the church over these things. And so Paul is writing to address this, to bring about unity in the church, to help them to understand things in the right perspective. And then in chapter 12, verse 31, at the very end of chapter 12, before he goes into chapter 13 and wrote what we just read, he said, love is a more excellent way. See, of all this competition and division, Paul is writing to say that love is superior to all of these spiritual gifts, all of these miraculous gifts. Paul wants them to know, look, you think you're something. I'm telling you, you're nothing, because you're not loving each other. And none of these gifts mean anything if you don't love one another. Paul said that even if you could speak in other languages, which is what tongues is, but you didn't love, it was nothing but a bunch of racket. Even if you could prophesy and had all knowledge and even had great faith but didn't have love, Paul said it's nothing. Even if you do incredible good, even if you give away everything that you have, and even if you lay down your life for others, but you don't do it out of love, Paul said, you've gained nothing. All of these acts, though, would have been highly honored among other Christians, right? Those who did these things, performed these things, would have been honored among the church, those who didn't have those gifts. And yet Paul said it's nothing. It's meaningless if you don't have love for one another. Look at these two lists. These are the lists where Paul says what love is and does, and what Paul says what love isn't and what love doesn't. Love is or does patient, kind, rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love isn't or doesn't envy, boast, arrogant, rude, insist on its own way, irritable, resentful, rejoice at wrongdoing. Which of these lists looks better to you? Which of these looks like the one that ought to define and describe a Christian? Well, obviously we would say, well, the one on the left, the one that tells us what love is and what love does, that's the one that ought to define us. You can obviously see which one we ought to be building in our lives. The one that gives us a life and a faith that's built to last is the one that's on the left, where we learn what love is and what love should be doing. But men, I want to ask you, look at both lists, and which one describes the kind of man, the kind of father, the kind of husband you ought to be? And of course we know it's the list on the left. That's who I ought to be. That's what ought to describe me and define me. But men, we can look on the list on the right and we say, oh no, I've got that one. Oh no, I've got that one too. Oh, I've got several of those. And I know that's the same for women, for everybody can look at the list on the left and say, boy, I've got a few of those in my life. And that's good that we can see that, because at least now we have clarity. We can see that when I do that thing, when I act like that, that's not love. And that doesn't build up my life, my faith, my home in the love of God. That's not what ought to define and describe me. I need to deal with that. I need to get rid of that. I need to do away with that. And I need to grow in the list on the left, the one of love, the way it ought to be. That's what Paul wants us to do. Paul wants to show us what love is and what it isn't, to point out to us what we ought to be focusing on, and how we can build our lives and our faith and our homes in a way that is built to last. Not just any version of love, though. You need to understand that this isn't just whatever version of love you come up with, whatever your definition of love is, or whatever the current definition today of love is in culture. It'll be different tomorrow. Don't worry, because they change it all the time, and you'll never keep up trying to keep up with culture. You'll never fit in trying to keep up with culture. As soon as you get settled in and you think you've found the right identity and you're following all the rules of culture of what they say you ought to do and believe and look like, it'll change on you. But you see, the source of real truth, actual truth, is God's Word. And God, the Creator, says, this is what love is. This is how you love. And it's the list that we see on the left. And this isn't just any version. It's the love that comes from God, and it's the love that is learned from God. You see, we've got to learn how to do this. We've got to learn how to be patient and kind and rejoice with the truth, to bear all things, hope all things, and endure all things. And we've got to learn how to stop doing and being the things on the right. We've got to learn, and that takes a lifetime of growing spiritually to learn to love like God loves us. We get our word love gets thrown around a whole lot, doesn't it? We throw that word around all the time. We love pizza. We go up and down and all. We love pizza. We say I love that dress. I love my truck. I love my dog. I love, my boyfriend, girlfriend. I love my spouse, and I love that football team. It's just we're all over the place with things that we love. We just use that in such a generic way, almost so it doesn't mean as much. Because it's just so broadly used about everything. Oh, I love that kind of potato chip. I hate that kind. Oh, I love my wife. You see how different that is. I love this team. I hate that team. But for the Greeks, for the first century Christians, the first century people, it wasn't that way, because in Greek they had several words for our word love. And so they were able to be very specific in what they were talking about. And sometimes there's overlap, and sometimes they're not intended to be used in a super specific way. We can see that in Scripture. But they had access to different words for love to describe what they wanted to talk about. Now, what's interesting is that one word that was not widely used by people. It was used, but not very much, and hadn't even really been nailed down with a specific definition. Was the word for love agape? That word was not widely used, and it was not really specifically defined for a while. Jesus began using this little word for love, and he inserted his meaning into this word. Agape is a very Christian word, because Jesus took this word for love that wasn't used much, and he said, I'm going to tell you and show you what this word means. I'm going to take that word, and this is going to be a Christian word, a New Testament word, and it's going to describe God's love for us, my love for you, and the love I want you to have for one another. And agape always describes the love that is of God and from God. Agape love always means that kind of love, the love of God and from God. The essence of agape is goodwill and benevolence and delight in the object of love. And that describes God's love for us, doesn't it? It describes his great love that he has for us, and it describes the love we're supposed to have for one another. This goodwill, benevolence, and delight in one another. Paul told the Christians in Corinth that their miraculous gifts weren't intended to last forever. He said, you don't have these gifts to just last forever in the next generation and the next generation. These are just for a temporary short amount of time for the purpose of confirming the message until the time is right, until we have the completed word. That's what the purpose was for. And in verse 8, Paul says, love never fails or never ends. It's translated both ways. And it never ends, and that's what we need to build up our house with. It's this love that never ends, that never fails. That's what we're supposed to build our lives with, our homes with, because that is built to last. You know, it's not going to fail and fall away and cease like the miraculous spiritual gifts, like a lot of products made today. But love of God, the love from God that we learn from him, what we're supposed to show one another, that love is built to last. You want a faith and a home that's built to last, you build it on the foundation of God's love. It's this steadfast love of the Lord that never ceases, Leviticus 3:22. And this love will last not only beyond these spiritual gifts, these miraculous gifts of the first century, but that love lasted all through time, will last all through time, and will exist perfectly and most fully in heaven when we're with God. Do you see that? See, it never ends. It never fails. And you've never been failed by the love of God. Now, sometimes we don't understand things, but God's love never fails. You never lose by loving someone the way God tells you to love somebody. You never lose by loving in the right way. And the person who is loved by you, they never lose by you loving them in the right way. Now, as humans, we don't always work that out well. But God's love never fails, and it never ends. This is the same love that God said in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that we're supposed to love him that with the love he loves us with. And the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's that kind of love. And it's interesting that in Ephesians 5, when Paul tells the church, tells husbands, you're to love your wife as Christ loved the church. That's agape love is what he's talking about. That's the kind of love that we learn from God, that we get from God, that we're supposed to give to one another. Let me say this to our men. Men, you're very important and greatly needed in the church. And men, you need to hear this, that other men need you around. If you think you're not necessary or important, other men need you around. And if you've looked around a little bit, you've seen that there's some teenage boys and some younger boys. They need you around too. You might say, well, I don't have any children, or my children are all out of the house. Men need you around. You're needed. Now, see, we're not very good at, we don't go up to one another and say, and tap each other on the shoulder and say, hey, I need you. We don't do that, do we? We don't say, I need you around. I need you in my life. We don't do that. But it's true. We don't even admit that. But we need one another's presence in the church. Men, you're extremely valuable in the church. And this in no way minimizes the great value of women. But we need the men in our church. Your presence and your participation are vital, not only for those here, but for the future of our church. In fact, here's some numbers I want to share with you about the importance of men and fathers in the home. If a father does not go to church, even if his wife does, only one child in 50 will become regular worshipers. But if a father goes regularly, regardless of what the mother does, between 2/3 and 3/4 of their children will attend as adults. Fathers, men, you're very important to the future of the Lord's church and your family. When both parents attend Bible class and worship, 72% of their children will attend Bible class in adulthood. Bible class. You want your children going to Bible class when they're off on their own? You've got to go to Bible class when they're little, when they're growing up. For you, you've got to do it. And you're not just doing it for you. You're doing it for the next generation and the next generation. You have no idea the impact that you're making. And the third one, when the father is the first person to become a Christian in the home, there's a 93% probability everyone else in the home becomes Christians. Remember the story of Cornelius in the book of Acts? A 93% chance that everyone else in the home becomes Christian. Now, I'm not saying, Mom, don't you keep from becoming a Christian or child, but look at how influential husbands and fathers and men are. You see, we've got to reach men with the Gospels. If we reach the father and the men, then we typically reach the whole family. A lot of times we think, well, if we just bus all the kids in, then the families will come. Well, not always. I mean, we hope that they do, and that's a great thing. But if we want to reach families, we need to reach men. And we've got to do this in this church too. We've got our men's prayer breakfast. And I'd never been to a prayer breakfast before. And my thinking was that, well, they probably just get together and talk about shooting and hunting and sports and spitting and stuff like that. No. That's not what they do. I'm telling you, here, the men, they get together and we have a good time, and there's a lot of conversation that happens, but when it's time to sit down and pray, I don't even know how, there's no end time to how long we pray. And I don't even know, I can't even count all the cards that we divide up to pray for you here and for people in this community and all over. Men of this church coming together to unite together to pray for this church and the work of God in this area. The influence and the impact and the need of men is powerful. Men, I want you to know that this church supports you and encourages you. We're on your side. We're fighting for you and your family and your faith and your home and your life and your workplace to help you be all that God has called you to be. You see, a life, faith, and family that's built on the love of God is built to last. If we would focus on having the love of God in my life and letting that come through my life, it came to me through the love of God through Christ. And now I need that love to come out of me to others. Just like Paul told me, with those characteristics, those are very tangible things. Patient, kind, all of those things. And not all of these other, if I would just work on that, what would that do to your family? What would that do in your personal life? What difference would that make in your workplace, in your home? That's how you build a home that will stand. Do you have the love of God in your life? Are you living knowing God's love? And is that the kind of love that you're loving others with? And if it's not, we want you to know that the Bullard Church of Christ is here to help you. We want to help you know the love of God. We want to help you live in the love of God. And the first step is to become a Christian, just like our brother Kiefer Johnson did last Wednesday. We applaud you and rejoice with you, and the angels in heaven rejoice because he drove an hour and a half to the Callaway's house to say, I'm ready. I know what I've got to do. Nothing was going to stop him because he said, I know what I've got to do with my life. What an amazing example to all of us. He knew the love of God and he responded to it. We all need to respond to the love of God. If we can help you this morning, we invite you to come forward as we stand and sing.